Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into some malicious compliance stories. Today we've got 3 tales of people who thought they could take whatever they wanted. Parking spots, security shortcuts, even entire trees. And discovered that consequences don't care about your sense of entitlement. Here we go. She wanted my spot, she got it. Yesterday I made what was supposed to be a quick Target run. You know, the kind where you tell yourself you're only going in for 1 or 2 things and somehow you leave with a cart full of stuff you didn't know you needed. The parking lot was busy, but not chaotic, just the usual steady stream of cars circling like vultures waiting for someone to pull out. I spotted a car backing out of a space about halfway down the row and flipped my blinker on immediately. I stopped and waited patiently while the car in the spot finished pulling out. As I was waiting, another car approached from the opposite direction. Because the car backing out was angled slightly toward my lane, I had to pause to let it clear the space safely before I could pull in. That's when the other driver seized the opportunity. The second the spot opened, she darted in from the opposite side and slid into it like she'd been training for competitive parking. I just sat there for a second, stunned. I'd clearly been waiting with my signal on. It wasn't subtle, there was no ambiguity about who had claimed that space. But instead of even pretending it was an honest mistake, the woman climbed out of her car, locked it, looked directly at me, rolled her eyes, and threw her hands up like I was the unreasonable one. I laughed out loud in disbelief. The spot wasn't even particularly close to the entrance, so it wasn't like she'd secured prime real estate. It was still a decent walk. I shook my head, muttered something about karma under my breath, and moved on to find another space farther back. I parked, grabbed my bag, and made the walk inside, telling myself it wasn't worth getting worked up over. Target did what Target does best, which is make time disappear. By the time I finished shopping and wheeled my cart back outside, I'd mostly forgotten about the parking lot drama. Then I spotted her car again. Same car, same smug energy radiating from its existence. And then I noticed where she had parked, right next to the shopping cart return area. Now, if you've ever parked next to one of those cart corrals, you know they're magnets for stray carts. People are supposed to neatly tuck them inside, but inevitably some get left halfway out or roll slightly to the side. It's a risky choice if you're precious about your paint job. I stood there for a moment, staring at her vehicle, and a tiny, petty idea began to bloom. My cart was already empty. I walked it to the corral and slid it into place. Then I looked around. There were several loose carts scattered nearby, some leaning against the rail, some just sitting awkwardly beside it. Without rushing, without making a scene, I began organizing. I carefully arranged carts around her car, not touching it, but close enough to form a snug little metal perimeter. I positioned a row along the passenger side, angled 2 behind the rear bumper, and tucked a couple near the driver's side door with just enough space for someone to squeeze through sideways. I made sure none were actually pressing against the car. I'm petty, not destructive. But from a distance, it absolutely looked like her car had been swallowed by a steel herd. As I finished my final adjustment, I saw her emerge from the store doors with a bag in each hand. Perfect timing. I calmly returned my own cart to the corral, got into my car, and started the engine. I didn't peel out or act suspicious. I simply pulled forward and happened to pass her vehicle on my way out of the row. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw it, her head whipped left and right as if trying to determine whether she'd parked inside a cart factory. I could see her shoulders stiffen. I rolled down my window as I drove by and called out cheerfully, "Hey, you can't park those carts there!" Her face shifted from confusion to fury in about half a second. She looked around wildly, probably trying to figure out who had done it and whether she had just been publicly mocked. I didn't stick around to watch her free herself from the metallic fortress. I just kept driving toward the exit, grinning like an idiot. The delivery was perfect. She stole your spot, rolled her eyes at you, and you just hit her with a line that made her the punchline. No damage, no confrontation, just a moment of pure inconvenience and confusion. That's the kind of karma that doesn't leave a mark, but definitely leaves a memory. The thing is, if she had simply taken the spot and gone about her day without theatrics, I probably would have shrugged it off entirely. Parking lots are chaotic. Stuff happens. But the eye roll, the hands thrown up, the silent accusation that I was somehow in the wrong for waiting my turn, That's what tipped it from minor annoyance to petty inspiration. As I drove home, I imagined her carefully maneuvering carts out of her way one by one, glancing around to see if anyone was watching. I pictured her muttering under her breath, maybe even kicking one lightly out of frustration. It wasn't damage, it wasn't confrontation. It was just inconvenience. Was it childish? Absolutely. Did it improve the world in any meaningful way? Not even slightly. But in that moment, after being treated like I was invisible and unreasonable for waiting my turn, it felt like a small, harmless balancing of the scales. And if she ever thinks about cutting someone off for a parking space again, maybe she'll remember that sometimes the walk from a slightly farther spot isn't the worst thing that can happen in a Target parking lot. And our second story. He thought locking his computer was optional. I've worked in information security long enough that some rules feel less like policies and more like gravity. One of those rules is painfully simple. You lock your computer when you walk away. It doesn't matter if you're an executive, an intern, or the person refilling the printer paper. An unlocked workstation in a corporate environment is basically an engraved invitation that says, please help yourself to confidential data. If you forget once, people remind you. If you forget repeatedly, the system reminds you in ways that are far less friendly. About a decade ago, my team had a lighthearted way of reinforcing the rule. If someone stepped away and left their machine open, a coworker would swoop in and send a harmless message from their chat account to the team channel. Something like, has anyone solved the meaning of life yet? Or, I'm bringing donuts tomorrow for everyone. It was never malicious, never offensive, and never damaging. The point wasn't humiliation, it was social correction. You'd come back, see the message, groan at your own carelessness, and lock your screen religiously for the next 6 months. Everyone understood the culture. We worked under the security umbrella, so the stakes were higher than most departments. If we formally reported every unlocked screen, it triggered retraining modules, written warnings, and eventually disciplinary action. The playful message was a pressure valve, a way of saying, don't make us file paperwork over this. It worked surprisingly well. Even the most absent-minded engineers learned to tap Windows L like it was muscle memory. That's the thing about that system. It wasn't about being mean. It was about keeping everyone out of actual trouble. A little embarrassment now beats a formal violation later. Then we hired Brandon. Brandon joined as a mid-level analyst transferred from another department. He was sharp enough on paper, but from day one he carried himself like policies were optional suggestions. On his second day, I noticed him walk away from his desk toward the elevator atrium with his email wide open. I introduced myself properly later that morning, shook his hand, and casually brought it up. Just a heads up, I said, keeping it friendly. You need to lock your computer whenever you step away. It's a company-wide security policy. I even forwarded him the documentation so he couldn't claim ignorance. He skimmed it, leaned back in his chair, and said, that's overkill. Nobody's going to hack me in the 5 minutes I grab coffee. The tone wasn't curious, it was dismissive. I explained that internal threats and opportunistic access were real risks, especially in our line of work. He shrugged and replied, whatever. Later that afternoon, he stood up for a bathroom break and made a visible show of leaving his screen unlocked. Over the next few weeks, multiple people reminded him. Some tried the playful message routine, which he didn't find amusing. He'd storm back to his desk and demand to know who had messed with his account. The irony was painful. Here was a guy working in security who acted like the concept of basic operational hygiene was beneath him. Meanwhile, he was being granted access to increasingly sensitive systems. One afternoon, I saw him head toward the elevators again. His desk happened to sit near the main foot traffic path between the break room, bathrooms, and conference rooms. I sat down at his unlocked computer, opened his email, and sent a mild, silly note to his team distribution list. Does anyone else think we should replace passwords with interpretive dance? I hit send and stood up just as he came back into view. He confronted me almost immediately. What were you doing at my desk? He demanded. I gave him the same response he'd given me weeks earlier. Whatever, I said, and walked off. Later that day, his manager Carl stopped by my desk. Carl and I had a solid working relationship built on mutual respect. He explained that Brandon didn't want to play that game and was considering reporting me to security for impersonation. I listened, nodded, and told Carl that was completely fine. No more games, I said. We'll follow standard procedure. That evening, I messaged my team and a few adjacent groups. I made it crystal clear Under no circumstances was anyone to send playful messages from Brandon's account. If his screen was unlocked, they were to log a formal security violation ticket. No reminders, no jokes, no grace. The next 2 days were a masterclass in natural consequences. His desk's prime location meant dozens of people walked past it daily. Every time someone noticed his screen unlocked, they filed a ticket. By Friday afternoon, nearly 50 violation reports had been logged. I personally submitted only 2. The rest came from normal traffic. On Monday morning, he was in mandatory security retraining. From my seat in the open floor plan, I could see him gesturing angrily in Carl's direction and occasionally pointing toward me. Carl approached me again, looking weary. "Can we ease up?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "If I see an unlocked workstation and don't report it, I'm the one violating policy," I replied. "We're just following the process." For the rest of that Monday, his computer was locked tighter than a vault. Tuesday morning, as I walked by on my way to get coffee, I saw his inbox open again, glowing on the screen like a neon sign. He was at the coffee station ahead of me. I told him calmly, "You left your computer unlocked again." He snapped back with a string of profanity and hurried to his desk. It didn't matter. By then, a dozen more tickets had already been filed. Unbeknownst to him, the policy had recently been tightened. After retraining, the next phase skipped written warnings and went straight to disciplinary action. He was called into a meeting with Carl, the department director, and members of the security compliance team. I learned later that he was placed on a security-related performance improvement plan. He lasted less than a week after that. No one set out to destroy his career. The lighthearted reminders were meant to protect him from exactly this outcome. But if you choose to work in security and openly disregard foundational policy out of sheer stubbornness, you're betting your job on ego. Gravity doesn't stop working because you don't believe in it, and neither do security controls. And our last story. My HOA destroyed the mature trees on my property, then told me to go kick sand. Last hurricane season hit our part of Florida hard. We were without power for a week, lost a handful of shingles, and a massive old oak behind our house finally gave up and toppled over. It had stood there longer than we'd owned the place, tall and dignified, and I hated seeing it go down. But it fell backward into the wooded strip behind our property, not toward the house, not toward the fence. It wasn't blocking anything or threatening anyone. We figured we'd deal with it eventually, but it wasn't urgent. About 3 weeks later, I came home from work and heard chainsaws before I even turned onto our street. Deep, angry, mechanical screaming, the kind that rattles your ribs. There were heavy trucks parked along the back access road behind our yard. At first, I assumed someone else had storm damage cleanup scheduled. Then I walked into my backyard. They weren't just cutting up the fallen oak, they were clearing everything. The thick line of trees that had bordered our property for 20 years. Oaks, pines, palmettos, all of it was being bulldozed. Massive equipment was pushing over perfectly healthy trees. Stumps were being ground into dust. The privacy buffer that made our backyard feel secluded was disappearing by the minute. I jogged down toward the fence line, waving my arms like an idiot. "Hey, stop! What are you doing?" A foreman in a bright vest walked over and held up a clipboard like it was a badge. "HOA ordered this section cleared," he said over the noise. "Whole strip's getting cleaned out." I pointed at the survey marker near our fence. "Half of those trees are on my property." He shrugged without emotion. "Not my call. You got a problem? Talk to the HOA." That shrug told you everything. He knew. He just didn't care. The HOA gave the order, he followed it, and the property line wasn't his problem. That's the moment you went from frustrated homeowner to future plaintiff. By the time the machinery left, it looked like a battlefield. Raw dirt, jagged stumps, no shade, no sound buffer, nothing. For the first time, I could see directly into the backyard of a house behind us I hadn't even known existed. A man stood on his deck staring at me like we were suddenly roommates. I could see his television glowing through the sliding glass door. I knew he could see ours. When my wife Marie got home and stepped into the yard, she just froze. "What happened?" she asked quietly. I told her. She looked at the open expanse where our trees used to be, and her eyes filled up. That backyard had been our escape. Coffee in the mornings, grilling on the weekends, the kids running around without feeling watched. Now it felt exposed, like someone had pulled the curtains off our life. That week I went to the HOA board meeting. I brought a folder with printed surveys, county property records, and before and after photos. I kept my voice calm even though my blood pressure was probably dangerous. There's been a mistake, I said, placing the documents on the table. Your contractor cleared trees on my property. I need this addressed. The board president, a man named Gary, who seemed overly proud of the small wooden gavel in front of him, barely glanced at the paperwork. We had authority to clear that area, he said. It was overgrown and posed a fire hazard. I leaned forward. It wasn't your land. It was mine. He waved a hand dismissively. The HOA has easement rights for maintenance. It's in the covenants. I looked him straight in the eye. I'm not in the HOA. This section predates it. I opted out years ago. That caused murmurs around the table. Gary's face flushed. Well, he said stiffly, the trees were a nuisance. They're gone now. Nothing we can do about it. Go kick sand. That was the exact phrase he used, in front of witnesses. I recorded the entire meeting on my phone. When Marie watched the video later and heard him say that, she didn't say much. She just picked up her phone and said, I'm calling Mike. Her brother Mike is an attorney in Tampa. Not a guy who dabbles in paperwork disputes for fun, but a legitimate litigator with a polished office and a staff that keeps everything immaculate. He listened carefully, asked for copies of the survey, the video, the contractor information, and told us to give him a week. A week later, we were sitting in his conference room while he flipped through a thick stack of documents. This is straightforward, he said. They trespassed. The contractor trespassed. Trees are property. They destroyed your property and reduced your property value by eliminating your privacy barrier. And we have them on video telling you to go kick sand. He tapped the page. We're naming the HOA, each board member individually, and the tree company. We filed the lawsuit. The tree company's insurance carrier called within days. They settled quickly, clearly wanting distance from the situation. The HOA did the opposite. Gary sent combative emails. They hired a lawyer who tried arguing easements, implied authority, even claimed the property line was unclear. Mike dismantled each argument with county maps and survey stamps. 6 months later, we were in mediation. The HOA's lawyer looked exhausted. Gary looked worse. Mike laid out our terms without raising his voice. Full restoration of the vegetation on my client's property, he said. Native species, minimum 15 feet tall at installation. All planning and maintenance costs covered, legal fees paid, and a written apology to be read at the next board meeting and published in the HOA newsletter. Gary started to protest, but his attorney cut him off with a quiet, "Take it, you'll lose at trial." They took it. Last month, the crew spent 3 full days planting mature oaks, pines, and flowering trees along our property line. It already looks better than before, more thoughtfully arranged, more deliberate. Within a couple of years, it'll be thicker than what we lost. At the next HOA meeting, Gary read the apology from a printed sheet, eyes down the entire time. He mumbled something about miscommunication and respecting property boundaries. Marie squeezed my hand while we sat in the back row. We didn't say a word. We didn't have to. When we walked back into our yard later that evening, the new trees were silhouetted against the sunset. They're young, but they're strong. Mike jokes that it's his favorite case, the one where the trees won. As for Gary, he still lives there, but he doesn't look in our direction anymore. Go kick sand, Gary. We've got roots now. 3 people, 3 assumptions, 3 reasons they were wrong. Story 1 was the art of inconvenience. The parking spot thief took what wasn't hers and added an eye roll for emphasis. The response? A cart fortress. No damage, no confrontation. Just 15 minutes of maneuvering and confusion. She'll think twice before cutting someone off again, or at least before parking next to a cart corral. Story 2 was the inevitability of policy. Brandon thought the rules didn't apply to him. The team gave him reminders, playful messages, friendly warnings. He ignored them all, so they stopped playing. 50 tickets, retraining, performance plan, termination. He didn't get fired because people were out to get him. He got fired because he refused to lock his computer. That's not revenge. That's just math. But story 3 wins, not because of the trees, though mature oaks are beautiful, but because of the scale. The HOA destroyed years of growth, told the homeowner to go kick sand, and then had to pay for every single replacement tree, plus legal fees, plus a public apology read aloud in a meeting. They didn't just lose money, they lost face. And now there's a forest growing where Gary's arrogance used to be. 3 stories, 1 question. Which one made you smile the most? Drop your vote in the comments. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.